Sedevacantism seems a bit complicated. It seems to be full of arguments about theology and history and canon law. Even before we get into all of the arguments, isn't it fair to say that, on the face of it, something must be wrong? After all, the true Christian religion, the Catholic religion, should be simple. It is indeed the great scholarly religion of a Saint Augustine or a Saint Aquinas, but at the same time it should make saints of illiterate peasants. And so, if it seems so complicated, doesn't that show that it's untrue? This may indeed be so if Sedevacantism were some occult and hidden truth, only accessible to an educated class. But, ultimately, Sedevacantism is simple. It is therefore within the purview of this presentation to show that Sedevacantism is simple, to make the concise argument in its favour. But more than that, it is also worth speaking to the principle behind this protest, because it might help to say something about our attitude towards the argument. You see, Sedevacantism is simple, but once the simple and direct argument is given, it is not always accepted. It is challenged with increasingly complex and nuanced arguments, until we are wrapped up in everything from canon law to theology in order to explain every which, what, why, and wherefore of the issue. Before we get to the argument itself, consider this comparison. Consider the claim, God exists. We can all see that in one very important sense, this claim is very simple and conveys a simple truth, one which is foundational, fundamental, and for many, the claim that God exists feels as natural as the claim humans breathe. Yet we also know that this claim can be very complex in at least two ways. First, it is complex in light of all that it entails. God exists, but who he is and how he exists and all that this means could fill libraries worth of books. The second way it is complex is due to the backlash. Say God exists to a cradle Catholic and perhaps the claim seems simple, but say it to an educated atheist and you will be faced with, but what if he doesn't? And how do you know? Or, what about the problem of evil? Perhaps they may even ask, what about this possible, nuanced theo-scientific argument about a pantheistic model of material creation? And before you know it, books upon books begin to be written. And so, the claim, God exists, is it simple or is it complex? It is a simple claim, a simple truth, even a self-evident truth once you examine the logic. But it is a simple claim that has grand, complex implications, and that leads to detailed and complex discussions. Our plain point at present is that the claim, Sedevacantism is true, is in a similar situation. It is simple, but no sooner is it stated than it raises questions, and even as questions are answered, more questions are raised, until the arguments become very involved indeed, and those with the education to argue about it find themselves calling upon conciliar history and canon law. Here then, we have an apparent irony underneath the whole situation. In defense against attacks, the case for Sedevacantism becomes increasingly complex, and then that very complexity is used as another attack to say that it cannot be true. Of course, this is not to say in any way that Sedevacantism cannot be challenged, or that no one should look into it and ask questions. For those who are unconvinced, it is due diligence to check. The only point is to show the flaw in positing that when more complexity is demanded, that very complexity itself is somehow proof that the claim isn't true. Anyway, that's all for the general principle of the matter. What about the argument itself? The simple argument for Sedevacantism is this. To be the head of the Catholic Church, you at least have to be a Catholic. And to be a Catholic, you have to hold the Catholic faith. Any institution that does not hold, preach, or practice the Catholic faith is not Catholic, no matter what name it gives itself. Ever since the Second Vatican Council, we have seen that the institution which has presented itself as the Catholic Church to most of the world has visibly and consistently broken from the teaching and practice of the Catholic Church and what it has taught for thousands of years. As just one example, the Church never taught that it was permissible to pray with other religions. In fact, it clearly, strictly, explicitly said not to do it. And no one needs to be a canon lawyer to know why. It is clear to reason. It breaks the first commandment. It puts other false religions alongside the true religion, and other false gods alongside the true God. Catholicism never has, nor ever will say that it can blend religions in this way. Hence, if you see an institution that allows it, you know it's not Catholic. This is clear to reason, but as it happens, we find as much stated in declarations and church teaching. But we are already getting ahead of ourselves. And so, that's it. At its core, that's really all there is to it. And once we saw the so-called new popes praying and practicing rituals alongside Protestants, Muslims, or all kinds of pagans, that should have been the end of the matter. In principle, a child should be able to see such things. If a child were told in a Catholic church that it's okay to be Protestant, the child would rightly look up and say, "Protestant? Mummy, that's not Catholic." If a child saw their clergy dressed in Buddhist robes inviting their congregation to meditate in search of nirvana, the child could declare, "Mummy, that's not Catholic." Or if that same child attended Sunday Mass and saw their so-called Catholic priest bring a goat up to the altar and sacrifice it in the name of Satan, the child may well cry out, "But Mummy, that's not Catholic." Yet why has it been so hard for the children to wake up and see it this time? Perhaps they were playing with their toys, or perhaps they were distracted by the silly music, or perhaps because Mummy and Daddy turned to the child during the goat sacrificing ritual, leaned down and said in a consoling voice, "Oh no dear, don't you worry. Things are just more complicated than they seem."